The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel Phillips Huntington. Chapter 6: The Cultural Reconfiguration of Global Politics. ASEAN is often cited as an example of an effective multicultural organization. It is, however, an example of the limits of such organizations. It is not a military alliance. While its members at times cooperate militarily on a bilateral basis, they are also all expanding their military budgets and engaged in military build-ups, in striking contrast to the reductions West European and Latin American countries are making. On the economic front, ASEAN was from the beginning designed to achieve economic cooperation rather than economic integration, and as a result, regionalism has developed at a modest pace, and even a free trade area is not contemplated until the 21st century. In 1978, ASEAN created the Post-Ministerial Conference in which its foreign ministers could meet with those from its dialogue partners, the United States, Japan, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and the European Community. The PMC, however, has been primarily a forum for bilateral conversations and has been unable to deal with any significant security issues. In 1993, ASEAN spawned a still larger arena, the ASEAN Regional Forum, which included its members and dialogue partners, plus Russia, China, Vietnam, Laos, and Papua New Guinea. As its name implies, however, this organization was a place for collective talk, not collective action. Members used its first meeting in July 1994 to air their views on regional security issues. But controversial issues were avoided because, as one of the officials commented, if they were raised, the participants concerned would begin attacking each other. ASEAN and its offspring evidence the limitations that inhere in multi-civilizational regional organizations. Meaningful East Asian regional organizations will emerge only if there is sufficient East Asian cultural commonality to sustain them. East Asian societies undoubtedly share some things in common which differentiate them from the West. Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad argues that these commonalities provide a basis for association and has promoted formation of the East Asian Economic Caucus on these grounds. It would include the ASEAN countries Myanmar, Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, and most important, China and Japan. Mahathir argues that the EAEC is rooted in a common culture. It should be thought of not just as a geographical group because it is in East Asia, but also as a cultural group. Although East Asians may be Japanese or Koreans or Indonesians, culturally they have certain similarities. Europeans flock together and Americans flock together. We Asians should flock together as well. Its purpose, as one of his associates said, is to enhance regional trade among countries with commonalities here in Asia. The underlying premise of the EAEC is thus that economics follows culture. Australia, New Zealand, and the United States are excluded from it because culturally they are not Asian. The success of the EAEC, however, depends overwhelmingly on participation by Japan and China. Mahathir has pleaded with the Japanese to join. Japan is Asian. Japan is of East Asia, he told a Japanese audience. You cannot turn from this geocultural fact. You belong here. The Japanese government, however, was reluctant to enlist in EAEC, in part for fear of offending the United States and in part because it was divided over whether it should identify itself with Asia. If Japan joins the EAEC, it would dominate it, which is likely to cause fear and uncertainty among the members as well as intense antagonism on the part of China. For several years, there was much talk of Japan creating an Asian yen bloc to balance the European Union and the NAFTA. Japan, however, is a lone country with few cultural connections with its neighbors, and as of 1995, no yen bloc had materialized. While ASEAN moved slowly, the yen bloc remained a dream. Japan wavered and the EAEC did not get off the ground. Economic interaction in East Asia nonetheless increased dramatically. This expansion was rooted in the cultural ties among East Asian Chinese communities. These ties gave rise to continuing informal integration of a Chinese based international economy, comparable in many respects to the Hanseatic League and perhaps leading to a de facto Chinese common market. In East Asia, as elsewhere, cultural commonality has been the prerequisite to meaningful economic integration. The end of the Cold War stimulated efforts to create new and to revive old regional economic organizations. The success of these efforts has depended overwhelmingly on the cultural homogeneity of the states involved. Shimon Peres' 1994 plan for a Middle East common market is likely to remain a desert mirage for some while to come. The Arab world, one Arab official commented, is not in need of an institution or a development bank in which Israel participates. The Association of Caribbean States, created in 1994 to link CARICOM to Haiti and the Spanish-speaking countries of the region, shows little signs of overcoming the linguistic and cultural differences of its diverse membership and the insularity of the former British colonies and their overwhelming orientation towards the United States. Efforts involving more culturally homogeneous organizations, on the other hand, were making progress. Although divided along sub-civilizational lines, Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey in 1985 revived the moribund regional cooperation for development, which they established in 1977, renaming it the Economic Cooperation Organization. Agreements were subsequently reached on tariff reductions and a variety of other measures, and in 1992, ECO membership was expanded to include Afghanistan and the 6 Muslim former Soviet republics. Meanwhile, the 5 Central Asian former Soviet republics in 1991 agreed in principle to create a common market, and in 1994, the 2 largest states, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, signed an agreement to allow the free circulation of goods, services, and capital, and to coordinate their fiscal, monetary, and tariff policies. In 1991, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay joined together in Mercosur with the goal of leapfrogging the normal stages of economic integration. And by 1995, a partial customs union was in place. In 1990, previously stagnant Central American Common Market established a free trade area, and in 1994, the formerly equally passive Adian group created a custom union. In 1992, the vice-grade countries Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia agreed to establish a Central European Free Trade Area and in 1994 speeded up the timetable for its realization. Trade expansion follows economic integration, and during the 1980s and early 1990s, intra-regional trade became increasingly more important relative to interregional trade. Trade within the European community constituted 50.6% of the community's total trade in 1980 and grew to 58.9% by 1989. Similar shifts towards regional trade occurred in North America and East Asia. In Latin America, the creation of Mercosur and the revival of the Andean Pact stimulated an upsurge of intra-Latin American trade in the early 1990s, with trade between Brazil and Argentina tripling and Colombia-Venezuela trade quadrupling between 1990 and 1993. In 1994, Brazil replaced the United States as Argentina's principal trading partner. The creation of NAFTA was similarly accompanied by a significant increase in Mexican-US trade. Trade within East Asia also expanded more rapidly than extra-regional trade, but its expansion was hampered by Japan's tendency to keep its markets closed. Trade among the countries of the Chinese Cultural Zone, ASEAN, Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, and China, on the other hand, increased from less than 20% of their total in 1970 to almost 30% of their total in 1992, while Japan's share of their trade declined from 23% to 13%. In 1992, Chinese zone exports to the other zone countries exceeded both their exports to the United States and their combined exports to Japan and the European community. As a society and civilization unique to itself, Japan faces difficulties developing its economic ties with East Asia and dealing with its economic differences with the United States and Europe. However strong the trade and investment links Japan may forge with other East Asian countries, its cultural differences from those countries and particularly from their largely Chinese economic elites preclude it from creating a Japanese-led regional economic grouping comparable to NAFTA or the European Union. At the same time, its cultural differences with the West exacerbate misunderstanding and antagonism in its economic relations with the United States and Europe. If, as seems to be the case, economic integration depends on cultural commonality, Japan, as a culturally lone country, could have an economically lonely future. In the past, the patterns of trade among nations have followed and paralleled the patterns of alliance among nations. In the emerging world, patterns of trade will be decisively influenced by the patterns of culture. Businessmen make deals with people they can understand and trust. States surrender sovereignty to international associations composed of like-minded states they understand and trust. The roots of economic cooperation are in cultural commonality. The structure of civilizations. In the Cold War, countries related to the two superpowers as allies, satellites, clients, neutrals, and non-aligned. In the post-Cold War world, countries relate to civilizations as member states, core states, lone countries, cleft countries, and torn countries. Like tribes and nations, civilizations have political structures. A member state is a country fully identified culturally with one civilization, as Egypt is with Arab Islamic civilization, and Italy is with European Western civilization. A civilization may also include people who share in and identify with its culture, but who live in states dominated by members of another civilization. Civilizations usually have one or more places viewed by their members as the principal source of sources of the civilization's culture. These sources are often located within the core states or states of civilization, that is, its most powerful and culturally central state or states. The number and role of core states vary from civilization to civilization and may change over time. Japanese civilization is virtually identical with the single Japanese core state. Sinic, Orthodox, and Hindu civilizations each have one overwhelmingly dominant core state. Other member states and people affiliated with their civilization in states dominated by people of a different civilizations. Overseas Chinese, near abroad Russians, Sri Lankan Tamils. Historically, the West has usually had several core states. It has now two cores, the United States and a Franco-German core in Europe, with Britain an additional center of power adrift between them. Islam, Latin America, and Africa lack core states. This is in part due to the imperialism of the Western powers, which divided among themselves Africa, the Middle East, and in earlier centuries and less decisively Latin America. The absence of an Islamic core state poses major problems for both Muslim and non-Muslim societies, which are discussed in Chapter 7. With respect to Latin America, conceivably Spain could have become the core state of a Spanish-speaking or even Iberian civilization, but its leaders consciously chose to become a member state in European civilization, while at the same time maintaining cultural links with its former colonies. Size, resources, population, military, and economic capacity qualify Brazil to be the leader of Latin America, and conceivably it could become that. Brazil, however, is to Latin America what Iran is to Islam. Otherwise, well qualified to be a core state, sub-civilizational differences, religious with Iran, linguistic with Brazil, make it difficult for it to assume that role. Latin America thus has several states, Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, and Argentina, which cooperate in and compete for leadership. The Latin American situation is also complicated by the fact that Mexico has attempted to redefine itself from Latin American to a North American identity, and Chile and other states may follow. In the end, Latin American civilization could emerge into and become one subvariant of a three-pronged Western civilization. The ability of any potential core state to provide leadership to sub-Saharan Africa is limited by its division into French-speaking and English-speaking countries. For a while, Côte d'Ivoire was the core state of French-speaking Africa. In considerable measure, however, the core state of French Africa has been France, which after independence maintained intimate economic, military, and political connections with its former colonies. The two African countries that are most qualified to become core states are both English-speaking. Size, resources, and location make Nigeria a potential core state, but its inter-civilizational disunity, massive corruption, political instability, repressive government, and economic problems have severely limited its ability to perform this role, although it has done so on occasion. South Africa's peaceful and negotiated transition from apartheid its industrial strength, its higher level of economic development compared to other African countries, its military capability, its natural resources, and its sophisticated black and white political leadership all mark South Africa as clearly the leader of Southern Africa, probably the leader of English Africa, and possibly the leader of all sub-Saharan Africa. A lone country lacks cultural commonality with other societies. Ethiopia, for example, is culturally isolated by its predominant language, Amharic, written in the Ethiopic script, its predominant religion, Coptic Orthodoxy, its imperial history, and its religious differentiation from the largely Muslim surrounding people. While Haiti's elite has traditionally relished its cultural ties to France, Haiti's Creole language, voodoo religion, revolutionary slave origins, and brutal history combine to make it a lone country. Every nation is unique. Sydney Mintz observed, but Haiti is in a class by itself. As a result, during the Haitian crisis of 1994, Latin American countries did not view Haiti as a Latin American problem and were unwilling to accept Haitian refugees, although they took in Cuban ones. In Latin America, as Panama's president-elect put it, Haiti is not recognized as a Latin American country. Haitians speak a different language. They have different ethnic roots, a different culture. They are very different altogether. Haiti is equally separate from the English-speaking black countries of the Caribbean. Haitians, one commentator observed, are just as strange to someone from Grenada or Jamaica as they would be to someone from Iowa or Montana. Haiti, the neighbor nobody wants, is truly a kinless country. The most important lone country is Japan. No other country shares its distinct culture, and Japanese migrants are either not numerically significant in other countries or have assimilated to the cultures of those countries. For example, Japanese Americans. Japan's loneliness is further enhanced by the fact that its culture is highly particularistic and does not involve a potentially universal religion, Christianity or Islam, or ideology, liberalism or communism, that could be exported to other societies and thus establish a cultural connection with people in those societies. Almost all countries are heterogeneous in that they include two or more ethnic, racial, and religious groups. Most countries are divided in that the differences and conflicts among these groups play an important role in the politics of the country. The depth of this division usually varies over time. Deep divisions within a country can lead to massive violence or threaten the country's existence. This latter threat and movements for autonomy or separation are most likely to arise when cultural differences coincide with differences in geographic location. If culture and geography do not coincide, they may be made to coincide through either genocide or forced migration. Countries with distinct cultural groupings belonging to the same civilization may become deeply divided, with separation either occurring, Czechoslovakia, or becoming a possibility, Canada. Deep divisions are, however, much more likely to emerge within a cleft country where large groups belong to different civilizations. Such divisions and the tensions that go with them often develop when a majority group belonging to one civilization attempts to define the state as its political instrument and to make its language, religion, and symbols those of the state, as Hindus, Sinhalese, and Muslims have attempted to do in India, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia. Cleft countries that territorially bestride the fault lines between civilizations face particular problems maintaining their unity. In Sudan, civil war has gone on for decades between the Muslim North and the largely Christian South. The same civilizational division has bedeviled Nigerian politics for a similar length of time and stimulated one major war of secession, plus coups, rioting, and other violence. In Tanzania, the Christian animist maintained and Arab Muslim Zanzibar have drifted apart and in many respects become two separate countries, with Zanzibar in 1992 secretly joining the organization of the Islamic Conference and then being induced by Tanzania to withdraw from it the following year. The same Christian Muslim division has generated tensions and conflicts in Kenya. On the Horn of Africa, largely Christian Ethiopia and overwhelmingly Muslim Eritrea separate from each other in 1993. Ethiopia was left, however, with a substantial Muslim minority among its Oromo people. Other countries divided by civilizational fault lines include India, Muslims and Hindus; Sri Lanka, Sinhalese Buddhists and Tamil Hindus; Malaysia and Singapore, Chinese and Malay Muslims; China, Han Chinese, Tibetan, Buddhist, Turkic Muslims; Philippines, Christians and Muslims; and Indonesia, Muslims and Timorese Christians. The divisive effect of civilizational fault lines has been most notable in those cleft countries held together during the Cold War by authoritarian communist regimes legitimated by Marx-Leninist ideology. With the collapse of communism, culture replaced ideology as the magnet of attraction and repulsion, and Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union came apart and divided into two new entities grouped along civilizational lines: Baltic, Protestant and Catholic, Orthodox and Muslim republics in the former Soviet Union; Catholic Slovenia and Croatia, partially Muslim Bosnia Herzegovina, and Orthodox Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia in the former Yugoslavia, where these successor entities still encompassed multi civilizational groups. Second stage divisions manifested themselves. Bosnia Herzegovina was divided by war into Serbian, Muslim, and Croatian sections, and Serbs and Croats fought each other in Croatia. The sustained peaceful position of Albanian Muslim Kosovo within Slavic Orthodox Serbia is highly uncertain, and tensions rose between the Albanian Muslim minority and the Slavic Orthodox majority in Macedonia. Many former Soviet republics also bestride civilizational fault lines, in part because the Soviet government shaped boundaries so as to create divided republics. Russian Crimea going to Ukraine, Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Russia has several relatively small Muslim minorities, most notably in the North Caucasus and the Volga region. Estonia, Latvia, and Kazakhstan have substantial Russian minorities, also produced in considerable measure by Soviet policy. Ukraine is divided between the Uniate nationalist Ukrainian-speaking West and the Orthodox Russian-speaking East. In a cleft country, major groups from two or more civilizations say, in effect, we are different peoples and belong to in different places. The forces of repulsion drive them apart, and they gravitate towards civilizational magnets in other societies. A torn country, in contrast, has a single predominant culture, which places it in one civilization, but its leaders want to shift it to another civilization. They say, in effect, we are one people and belong together in one place, but we want to change that place. Unlike the people of cleft countries, the people of torn countries agree on who they are but disagree on which civilization is properly their civilization. Typically, a significant portion of the leaders embrace a Kemalist strategy and decide their society should reject its non-Western culture and institutions, should join the West, and should both modernize and westernize. Russia has been a torn country since Peter the Great, divided over the issue of whether it is part of the Western civilization or is the core of a distinct Eurasian Orthodox civilization. Mustafa Kemal's country is, of course, the classic torn country which, since the 1920s, has been trying to modernize, to westernize, and to become part of the West. After almost 2 centuries of Mexico defining itself as a Latin American country in opposition to the United States, its leaders in the 1980s made their country a torn country by attempting to redefine it as a North American society. Australia's leaders in the 1990s, in contrast, are trying to delink their country from the West and make it a part of Asia, thereby creating a torn country in reverse. Torn countries are identifiable by two phenomena. Their leaders refer to them as a bridge between two cultures, and observers described them as Janus faced. Russia looks west and east. Turkey east west, which is best. Australian nationalism, divided loyalties are typically headlines highlighting torn countries' identity problems.